Hi, you're listening to Meeting of Minds with Jerry Bowyer. And the mind you're going to be meeting today belongs to Tom Spence, who's the head of Regnery Publishing Company, formerly the head of Spence Publishing, one of my favorite publishing companies of all time. But he's with a much bigger house now, and I'm glad to see that as well. And he had an editorial in the Wall Street Journal recently about Banned Books Week. Let me get the exact title right. Maybe you didn't know we were in Banned Books Week, but we were. And the title is Banned Books Week Isn't Actually Interested in Banned Books. If it were, conservative writers like Abigail Shrier and Ryan T. Anderson would be on the list. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So why'd you write this op-ed?
Well, Banned Books Week has been around for a long time. And since the early 80s. And every year when it rolls around, I'm always slightly annoyed. I go between being annoyed and amused because the whole thing for years has been an exercise in hypocrisy. In fact, one of my old colleague from Spence Publishing days, a guy called Mitch Muncy, wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal maybe 15 years ago, poking fun at Banned Books Week. And the point there was none of the books that you will find promoted in your bookstore or at your public library during Banned Books Week has ever been banned in any real sense. Right? And I mean, I would define banned, and I think most people would, as meaning that a book has been removed from circulation, that somebody who wants that book, someone in the general public who wants that book, can't find it, or at least it's very difficult to find. The place that you'll find most of the titles from the Banned Books Week promotion is the bestseller list. So they're, not really banned. What they have in common is not that someone from the government or Big Brother has removed them from the market. What they have in common is that they almost entirely express a left-wing point of view on something, and usually something having to do with sex or race, kind of the woke topics. And the books that have always been promoted on Banned Books Week have been challenged. That's the word they'll use in the small type, meaning that some parent somewhere has found, some book extolling the newest frontiers of the sexual revolution in their kindergartner's school libraries.
Right.
And goes and objects to that. Right?
Yes, that's banning. And they never take them. They don't take them out of the school library.
No.
I mean, it's almost like, oh, finally, a parent came forward, and asked about this so that we can consider this a challenged book and therefore upgrade it to the banned list.
Yeah,
which we can then go ahead and sell the living daylights out of this book and turn that into a marketing gimmick, because it is. I mean, it amounts to a marketing gimmick at this point, doesn't it?
Oh, that's what it is. And I'm in the business of selling books, so I don't begrudge somebody his marketing gimmick. That's what it is.
Right.
So we've been making fun of Banned Books Week for a long time. What provoked me to sit down and write this op-ed this year was that in 2021, I argue, book banning has actually appeared in the United States. But before that, it's been very hard to argue that any book is banned in a meaningful sense. That hasn't happened in a long time. But now there are real efforts, and sometimes successful, to ban books, meaning make them unavailable to somebody who wants it. And that's started happening in the past year. And guess what? None of those books is featured in your banned.
Of course not. Abigail Schrier, Ryan Anderson, is it Deborah So? None of the people who are crossways with the alphabet agenda, who are probably the most banned That's probably the most banned category of authors.
Yeah.
None of those people actually get to be extolled by being banned. They're
That's
so
right.
banned that even their banning, the mentioning of their banning is banned. I mean, that's really banned.
That's really banned, yeah. And what finally pushed me over the edge of rage and got me to sit down and write this op-ed was an episode with that we had with the American Booksellers Association, which is one of the chief sponsors of Banned Books Week. And that involved Abigail Shrier's book, Irreversible Damage. And I mentioned this in that op-ed. The ABA, the American Booksellers Association, has a program they call a white box mailer. And if a publisher pays a fee, the ABA will put a review copy of a book into a small white box that's mailed every other month to their 750 member independent bookstores. So it's just a way of advertising your book to the book buyers, right? And independent bookstores are not generally friendly territory for Regnery Publishing or any other conservative authors or publishers. And we decided to send them Abigail's book, this book on transgender craze among teenage girls, because in a funny way, it has attracted support from some unexpected quarters. There are a lot of feminists who generally probably wouldn't be too enamored with Regnery's line of books, but who are on the wrong side of this transgender thing, because they have decided that turning girls into boys
is anti-girl.
Really a feminist goal,
right?
So we sent it with the materials that we included with the book. You get a one-page flyer with quotations from these kind of people.
Right.
We sent it out, and the box arrives at a bookstore in Brooklyn, and one of the employees there opens it up and suffers an experience, Jerry, that no American should have to go through. She was confronted with an objectionable opinion, that had been printed. And so, like a good offended modern American, she went directly to Twitter and tweeted out to the world that the ABA had, offended her in this grievous way by sending this book.
I believe she was seething.
Seething. Yes,
seething.
That's the word. Yes,
isn't that an interesting word?
Yeah.
I mean, ticked off, bothered. No, the existence of this book makes me seethe. Right. I mean, that's a pretty narrow worldview. Anyway, I know you. I mean, I see books all the time that I don't agree with. I think I've yet to seethe.
Right.
Over a book.
Well, the difference between you and me and this lady is that if you and I do seethe over something, we seethe alone. and the ABA felt her pain, and within hours of her tweeting this out, issued an apology that is more craven even than anything I would say to my wife after I've got in trouble. Just like, how could we have done this? How thoughtless.
Whether she's seething or not. I doubt she seethes much.
She doesn't seethe as much as this woman does.
Okay,
no,
right.
I don't think.
Yeah.
So anyway, in particular, they apologized for committing an act of violence in sending this to her. No one, and then a few days later, the ABA issued a longer, sort of more formal apology that said all the same things. And vowed, never to do something like that again. No one ever got in touch with Regnery Publishing, which had paid for this.
Did you get your fee back? Did they return the fee?
So, well, that's a long story. I began writing to them, and I wrote several times and got no reply at all. We eventually found out, fortunately for us, the ABA is not terribly efficient in their accounting department, and hadn't yet been built. So
I see.
we hadn't paid for it yet, and we're not planning to.
Yes.
But no one ever got in touch with us for our comments, or to hear, or with Abigail Schrier. They issued what was really a nasty defamation of Abigail Schrier, sent out to the whole world of books. And this was all just a few weeks before Banned Books Weeks was to begin. With the theme this year of censorship divides us, something unites us.
Books unite us. Books unite us.
Yeah.
Censorship divides us.
So,
which is
books unite us
yes.
if we all agree on everything.
Yes. In my experience, books don't unite us. I never thought that was their job. I never once thought that the job of a book is to kumbaya us together. I mean, it's almost like the job of a book is to do the opposite. I mean, if it's something we already believe, then what's the book for?
Exactly. Well, it just shows out what a depressive person you are, Jerry.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And just to be a little Girardian here, I don't know if you're into Rene Girard and the scapegoat mechanism.
Yeah, yes.
Censorship unites us, right? Because if a group comes together and censors something, that is a point of unity. Rene Girard would call it the unity of, everyone minus one, or everyone minus whatever, 49%. You can do it that way. So the banning of a book is an act of uniting. It's just a bad act of uniting. It's the uniting of the majority of the power structure in any institution against the unpopular opinion, which is expelled and scapegoated.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
I don't think they're reading a lot of Girard over
line. There. Censorship unites us, because that is exactly right. That is right on.
I mean, otherwise they wouldn't have responded in 2 hours, right? This is a unity point. I'm kind of reminded a little bit. I told you the story about Target, which I'm an investor in, and within a couple of hours of someone tweeting an objection, and I don't remember now whether it was or Schreier or both. I think
it was Abigail Schreier.
It was Schreier.
It was irreversible damage.
Within a couple of hours, they went out and said, "Oh, sorry, we didn't know, and we're not going to sell this anymore." So, what kind of decision-making process is that, right? And then there was a kind of a pushback, and then they kind of put it back on the website. And then I reached out as an investor because I'm a shareholder, or represent one, and it's my right to know. And they said, yeah, that wasn't a good process. We'll do a good process. So then they wrote this extremely vague statement. We will not publish something which in our opinion harms a group or, something like a group in a significant way, which means they can do whatever they want with that. They didn't publish that statement. And then they quietly banned Schreier and
took it down again.
So again, they did it secretly. Profiles and Courage is not on their book list. So it's fascinating to see that. And then I challenged them on it, and essentially there's, what can I said, well, okay, that's the statement. Who's on the committee that interprets the statement? Well, it's not information I can share at this time. Well, okay, when can you share that information? So, I mean, it's kind of a situation where personnel is policy. In that, excuse me, there is no policy which is good enough to make up for intolerant gatekeepers.
Right.
So what was the response to your op-ed?
The ABA did not respond to it as far as I know, nor did the American Library Association. But we've received, a lot of supportive messages. And I found that most people have never even heard of Banned Books Week. And if you're in the book business, you hear about it, but right. Most people out there haven't. I hope that it at least alerted people, though, to what's starting to happen. Because the thing with the ABA mailing, well, that was silly, and there was a Twitter storm, and Abigail Schreier is nobody's fool when it comes to Twitter, And so we ended up selling a lot of books, not through the independent bookstore members of the ABA, but, from the publicity we got from that. So being banned or canceled is good for business up to a point. The Target story was the same. When they removed the book, we could make hay with that. The problem comes is if you are removed from Amazon.
Yes.
And that's at the point at which it's no longer fun to be canceled.
Right.
And that's started happening. So Amazon, as I said in this op-ed, has been very good for publishers like Regnery in a lot of ways, because all of these bookstore buyers who used to be the gatekeepers of the book business are generally, pretty uniformly left-wing in their views. Some are more open-minded than others, but that was always an obstacle to get conservative books into bookstores. Amazon comes along and the world's open to us.
Yes.
And we can get any of our books in front of any reader in the whole world. So that's great. So I'm not, I think all publishers have a love-hate relationship with Amazon. That's the love part. But with the flip side of that is that if a book is not there on Amazon,
doesn't really have a chance. Yeah.
Right. Because Amazon's market share varies with genre, but it's, between 60 or 80% of the books sold, depending on the field. So if Amazon doesn't carry your book, it's invisible. And people have started to realize that. And the first book that I'm aware of anyway that was the victim of this was Ryan Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally.
Right.
Which in the past year, and that book had been published a few, 3, 4, 5 years earlier. And it's an excellent book. It's very temperate. I mean, Ryan's a good friend of mine, and I don't mean this as an insult, but it's almost boring. It's a very kind of philosophical look at the question and legal, and there's no flame throwing in the book. And he bends over backwards to be charitable, sympathetic, and so on, as does Abigail Shrier. But that book disappeared one day. Poof. No word to the publisher, Encounter Books, no word to the author, no word to anybody. It was just gone. And no explanation. So the same thing almost happened. Well, when we heard that, we thought, aha, we've got, what about Abigail Schreier's book?
Yes.
What happened to that?
Right. And
we didn't even know at the time, but a group of employees at Amazon that calls themselves Glamazon filed a petition, and the process started. There was a formal review process. Some sources inside Amazon told us that it went all the way to the top. And I mean, I can't document that, but apparently it did. And somebody very high up at Amazon decided not to cancel this book. So Abigail's book, Irreversible Damage, is still available on Amazon. But there was, as I like to say, that book was on trial for its life. And neither the publisher nor the author had any idea. No one came to us for, our side of the story.
So no opportunity to offer a defense.
Absolutely not. No, we had no idea that it was under review in that way.
It was interesting in my conversation with Target. I haven't had this conversation with Amazon because it's not in the portfolio. Okay, Apple was, so I had the conversation with Apple.
You can't talk to human beings at Amazon. There's only computers there.
Oh, I see. Got it. So I had constructive conversation at Apple and up to a point with Target. And I said, well, what about an appeal process? Oh yeah, we have an appeal process. I said, well, how does that work? Well, the publishers know how to do it. Okay, well,
Mm,
tell me how to do it so I can tell a publisher how to do it. And I was so clearly getting the runaround.
yeah.
That it's like, well, there's a process in place for the process of dealing with the process. Okay, what is the step? Give me the step in the process. Well, they should already know it. Do
Yeah.
you know what the process is?
No.
No. No, you're a book that's been banned by Target. You had a book that's been
Hmm.
banned by Target, and you don't know the process.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. To be fair, I'm not the one at our company who's really dealing with them, but I don't think we know the process because it certainly, no one here was pursuing any process when her book disappeared from Target.
Yeah.
We were just, yeah, standing there watching it happen.
Right. So, I mean, in essence, again, there's no real good faith thing going on here with these. They're just
No, 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 no. There's fear. I think the people that at Amazon or wherever that are doing this, certainly at Target, they're just scared. They're afraid they're going to have a Twitter mob come after them, and so they are more scared of the angry woke Twitter mob than they are of Regnery, I guess.
Well, when are they going to be scared of the United States Senate and the
Yeah,
possibility of another Republican president and the fact that big corporations have one friend in Washington, historically, the Republican Party, and they're losing
yeah.
that friend by doing this stuff?
They're losing that friend. Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned the United States Senate because I have here this letter. This is a letter from Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, who decided that it was time for Amazon to be afraid of the United States Senate, but for different purposes than you're talking about.
Yeah.
She sent a letter, it's dated September 7th, to the CEO of Amazon, in which she presents him with an index of prohibited books, which she, the Grand Inquisitor, has compiled. The subject of the letter was books about COVID and the pandemic. And as you've probably noticed, the secret here, the way you get things done is, when you grab power, is by putting it all in terms of misinformation and public health. So misinformation means any information that Elizabeth Warren does not agree with or finds inconvenient in some way. And so she sent this letter, which is about 5 or 6 pages, to Amazon, basically threatening them, saying you need to adjust your algorithms so that these books disappear. No one should find these books. And one of the letter came to my attention particularly because one of the forbidden authors is Alex Berenson, whose book we are about to publish in November, called Pandemia. And he has self-published through Amazon 4 kind of booklets at various points in the last year on the pandemic. So again, good for Amazon. They provided a platform for Alex Berenson, although those all got canceled at various points. Getting Amazon to keep them on the website was practically a full-time job for Alex for a while. But they're there. But Elizabeth Warren doesn't like it. So, can you imagine if a United States senator sent a threatening letter to Amazon or anybody else in the book business saying that Ta-Nehisi Coates' books are full of misinformation, or that
1619
project. 1619 project is full of misinformation. And if you know what's good for you, you'll get rid of those things. This guy would have fallen, right?
Right.
And no one has said a thing about what Elizabeth Warren is doing.
And the thing that strikes me about this from a risk management point of view, because again, I approach this as an investor.
Mm-hmm.
And so these companies say, well, we do these things for risk management. And I'm saying, I think you need to think harder about what risk management is. A Twitter storm isn't risk. New regulations, change in the environment when it comes to litigation. These things are risk. Getting crossways with the only party that's ever been willing to give you any benefit of the doubt, because an Elizabeth Warren will never be happy with an Amazon. Ban Alex Berenson. Okay, got to ban something else. I mean, there's no way that they're ever going to be able to ban enough. They're a big corporation. Jeff Bezos is a multi-billionaire, and so they're the enemy no matter what. But there's at least a hope of having some relationship with the Republicans, except not now, because these things are highly visible and they make us angry. We even seethe once in a while. We're not mainly seethers, but even we're starting to seethe. Not by the existence of the books, but by the banning of the books. Marco Rubio has legislation coming out shortly, which basically is going to make it, corporations are going to have to justify their engagement with politics as being in the interest of the shareholders, and not in vague ways. I mean, they have to actually show that their the business judgment rule has to be modified, so they actually have to show we run the company according to our business judgment, and that the arguments have to be strong ones rather than pretty much any argument will go. So Rubio, and the big mo in the Republican side now is pretty anti-corporate.
Yeah.
Now, I don't particularly like that. I still believe everything I did, for the past 40 or 50 years about corporations and freedom and all the rest of it. But I do recognize that the political risk is harder on the backlash side than I think it is on the woke side for these companies. And I think they need to take that seriously.
They may find out something about that in the next couple of years.
Yes. All right. So so you mentioned that you've got Alex Berenson coming down the pike. By the way, the observation you made, I think, is important in that, when she tries to ban a book, she's probably not going to ban it. There's a kabuki theater aspect to this. And in many ways, whether they intend it to help us or not, it does help us. Right now, I mean, I think Regnery is extremely well positioned, because if some big publishing company says, okay, we can't do Josh Hawley, because he did this on January 6th, that's it, then you can come along and say, all right, here's the city of refuge. And I'm seeing conservative media and publishing even being a city of refuge for non-conservatives. In other words, if you're a liberal, if you're a trans-exclusionary radical feminist, if you're just an old-fashioned liberal, there's no place for you in the liberal institutions. They're probably the place for you now is in conservative institutions in many ways, because we have a freer conversation.
Alex Berenson is the perfect example of that. Alex is a former New York Times reporter. He says over and over again, I'm not a conservative. I'm not a conservative. And but he is, I think, the classic liberal, mugged by reality.
Right.
I met him the first time a year ago at Hillsdale College's Constitution Day conference here, which was the only live event that took place for a long time here. And so Alex, who's this, born and raised in New York, a Yaley, New York Times reporter, he had, I'm sure, never seen, he'd seen the world. He'd been an embedded reporter in Iraq. He'd seen a lot more of the world than I had in certain ways, but probably didn't know many people like folks I grew up with in Texas. And he was there at this conference speaking to a big room full of mostly, I would say, septuagenarian Hillsdale lovers, like all of these nice people from the Midwest and the South who send in their $10 donations or whatever it is, to Hillsdale College, and came to this conference. And I mean, he had them in the palm of his hand. You could have heard a pin drop when he was talking. Everyone was fascinated, loved hearing what he was saying. He was received very warmly. And you could just tell he was trying to think like what to make of this. And at that point, I began trying to persuade him to come publish his book with Regnery. He was very always very polite about it. It never gave us the cold shoulder or anything like that. But for quite a while, he was, I would say, just a bit friendly but standoffish, and freely admitted, he says, "Look, my part of my thing, my cachet, is that I'm a former New York Times reporter, and I'm nervous about publishing with Regnery, a conservative publisher." And so I stayed in touch with him. Eventually, he came around, and now he's a very enthusiastic Regnery author, and is thrilled at kind of where his book is headed, and very grateful. And see, not that he ever thought we had horns, but I think he's really come to appreciate what a place like Regnery offers. And it's been great for us because, I would prefer that not every single one of our authors be a, dyed-in-the-wool NRA member or whatever else. It's nice to have some real diversity. Look at that. Where do you find diversity? Well, come to Regnery. And, so it's been a really rewarding experience working with Alex, as well as just a lot of fun. He's a brilliant guy, a blast to work with, and he's figured out there's no home for him at the big New York publishers anymore. Well, actually, one person who helped us convince him of that was Abigail Shrier. I talked to her. I said, I'm talking to Alex Berenson. He's just kind of nervous about publishing. She says, let me talk to him. So we put him in touch.
Is Abigail a conservative?
Yes, she is. She is, a very interesting thinker. She's a conservative who has an ability to speak to a very broad audience. And she's great. I mean, she, like Alex, she's just brilliant. So, for example, in her, she doesn't try to hide that she's a conservative. And if I had to sort of put her in a pigeonhole, in the big desk of conservative, is she a neocon? Is she a paleo? Is she a national con? Whatever, all these things. I don't really know, where she would go. But in Irreversible Damage, and in the many interviews she's done since it was published, she's always very careful to say, I am not quarreling with adults who want to go down this road. I don't really know what her personal opinion is about it. She says, I am talking about teenage girls here, and there's really no reasonable people of varying opinions should all be able to agree that doing a mastectomy on a healthy 14 or 15-year-old who's obviously very troubled is not a good idea.
Yeah. I wonder to some degree if what we're seeing now maybe illustrates the degree to which there really is no neutrality, in the sense that Abigail Schreier doesn't have a quarrel with adults who want to undergo sexual reassignment surgery. Deborah So, liberal feminist, right? Very pro-gay, very pro-trans, just not children, right? Very scientific. Abigail Schreier, again, very scientific, meticulously documents. It's almost like it doesn't, we kind of have this sense, maybe many of us have this illusion that there is a common ground zone. And if we're not flamethrowers, if we appeal to fact and science, or in Ryan Anderson's case, it would be natural law, that this is common ground and common sense, and that we can sort of make progress that way and be accepted. And I think it's whether that was ever the case, we were reaching at a point of like epistemological consistency. It's a little bit like in C.S. Lewis, he says this a couple of places, but one of the places is That Hideous Strength, where the world is sharpening up and the differences are sharpening and neutrality is disappearing. Mm-hmm. There's almost a sense of you can be J.K. Rowling, the wokest woman in Britain for 20 years.
Yeah.
Right? And you can have all of that in line, and you say one thing that's out of line, and you're just another KKK, neo-Nazi, trans-hating, fundamental, whatever they want to call you.
Yeah.
So maybe we kind of need to wake up from the illusion that there is any kind of neutrality or common ground. That doesn't if it ever really existed, it was a temporary truce. Wasn't one of your books at Spence, The Long Truce?
Yes.
You remember The Long Truce?
By A.J. Conyers. Yeah.
Right. And the premise is that there was an idea that if we adopt Enlightenment values, we can have a truce between two different worldviews. And he says the truce didn't work. The truce was always essentially a concession of principle to power. And the long truce now is, to the degree, I agree with Conyers. I don't think it ever was really a functional truce. Yeah. I think it was an armistice, like a tense armistice. The truce is over now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's going to be free zones and there's going to be non-free zones. Now, I mean, there could be a conservative cancel culture. We have to be careful. We have to be a free zone ourselves, and not just throw everyone out because we say they're a rhino because they said one thing we don't like about vaccines or Trump or January 6th. We have to stay a free zone. But anyway, that was a little philosophical speech.
Well, I agree with you. And I think I haven't had this conversation with Abigail. It would be interesting too, but I can't help. I would predict that her experience with the promotion of irreversible damage has disabused her of any
neutral ground
ideas. Yeah. I mean, it's true that she has. Because of the kind of very narrow ground that she stakes out and what she's arguing about, she has been able to make her case in some fora that would not ordinarily be open to conservative writers. And so I wouldn't say it hasn't accomplished something. She was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and
that's a very free zone.
That's a free zone, exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, I think you're right.
It sort of reminds me a little bit of Jordan Peterson, who is by any reasonable definition a liberal.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Jungian psychology, and he says the foundation of all of his thinking is Darwinianism.
Yeah.
Right? But there's a little bit there's a pushback against the extremes of wokeism, and essentially he's just put him on the pile. That's another white supremacist.
Right, yeah. He's Jerry Falwell, right?
Yeah, he's Jerry Falwell, right. And I think that those people are beginning to realize that their decency and neutrality bought them nothing. Now, you do it if it's right? You behave decently and you appeal to facts because it's right. But let's get rid of any idea that that's going to be cover against the mobs. The opinion molding institutions are captured.
Yeah.
So it's now, to me, it's about building other institutions. Regnery being one of them.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. We went past the allotted 30 minutes.
Okay.
Anything else you want to add before we call it a day? I've really appreciated this conversation.
Oh no, I'm grateful to you for having me on and bringing this subject up for your listeners, and tell them to make sure they head to their library or bookstore next year at the end of September for Banned Books Week.
Here's my recommendation. Go buy an actual banned book.
Yeah.
And it's not To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's not some trans thing. You find a lot of them at Regnery and other conservative publishers. So you want to object to their objection, buy Schreier or Anderson, etc. Tom Spence, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Gary.